7:42, let's have a look at the headlines today with Deputy Editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers, and Assistant Editor of The Spectator, Cindy Yu. Good morning to you both. Fraser, let's kick off with Tata Steel and what they're saying, Port Talbot being sacrificed to the angry god of net zero.
Yes, this is the tragedy of the loss of 2,800 jobs in Port Talbot in Wales, at the UK's largest steel-making plant. So this has been a long time coming, actually. The two last blast furnaces are going to be scrapped and they're going to be replaced with an electric arc furnace. So that will mean that steel will be made in a more green fashion.
But only recycled steel.
But only recycled steel. So there's lots of big implications for this. Obviously, this is absolutely devastating, not only for the people who directly are losing their jobs as a result of this, devastating for the town and the local community, because, you know, in towns like Port Talbot, I mean, it is the steelworks. There's nothing, you know, there's nothing beyond that. I mean, you know, so many towns and villages in the 1980s are still scarred by the deindustrialisation of the 1980s. And I think we're now going to see a sort of wave of net zero deindustrialisation, unfortunatally. And it has national implications for the UK because, as you just said, Stephen, you know, this new eco-friendly arc furnace can only make recycled steel, or it can't make fresh virgin steel, which is actually the type of steel that is used for most manufacturing purposes. So it severely downgrades our capacity as a country to make what is a vital ingredient for other processes. That has implications not only for industry, but also for defence and things like that.
So it's a falsehood as well, isn't it, in that it will cut Wales's emissions, yes, but we will still have to buy virgin steel from other countries,
absolutely,
which are going to have to boost their manufacturing of it in order to make up for Wales's loss. So the planet isn't going to benefit.
Well, this is the, you know, often the sort of paradox of net zero. That's right. You know, if you force industry elsewhere, we still need all of these goods. You know, the need hasn't gone away, so they'll just be made in China or somewhere like that. Now, you know, the British steel industry has been in crisis for a long time. Other countries have been eating our lunch in these terms for many years. But it is fair to say that net zero here has delivered the decisive blow. And what's tragic about that is that, you know, there are many people on the Labour Party up in arms about this, but they're, if anything, even more, you know, evangelistic for this process of decarbonisation, and are not thinking about, you know, the consequence for jobs, the consequences for industry and for working people that this is going to have.
I think we have to be careful when we talk about this because, I mean, Tata Steel is a private company, right? We have to be careful not to talk about it as if it's a government decision to close, to change these furnaces.
The government's giving them a load of money to encourage
to keep the jobs, and so it was 500 million has already been committed, 500 million pounds. So what are we actually saying here? That we want more taxpayers' money going into Tata Steel so that they can keep the jobs going? I'm not sure that is the option. But I think where the government has failed is not creating the green jobs that Boris Johnson talked about when he first talked about net zero a few years ago. You know, he promised 100,000 jobs. And actually what we're seeing is that not just on steel, but on renewables, other countries are eating our lunch too. So when you look at a country like Denmark, it actually consumes less wind power than the UK does, but it has more wind power jobs. So why are we not creating the jobs? If we're going to go full steam ahead with net zero, then let's at least bring some of the jobs here, which is what we were promised, but that's not happening at the moment.
And of course, the leader in, you know, producing renewable energy is China. But the reason they're able to do that is because they have cheap electricity, and they have cheap electricity because they are not cutting down on their use of fossil fuels. So again, it's this very strange paradox that you know, people need to get their heads around. There's no future of, you know, using less energy. We will need much more energy as the world continues to expand, as populations continue to grow, and as our needs get more. You know, we want to be a richer country. That involves using more energy. We need it to be cheaper, but unfortunately, net zero is doing the opposite of that. So it's kind of almost like a vicious cycle in a way. We're not even getting good at producing the green jobs.
Yeah. OK, let's have a look at the Financial Times, Cindy, should we, where the war leadership, the war cabinet in Israel is feeling the strain.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think back to before October 7th, Israeli politics is very, very divided. You know, you've got coalition governments being formed all the time, Netanyahu's opponents trying to get him out or even lock him up, but failing, and he's still around as Prime Minister. And then October 7th happens, you know, this war cabinet comes together of this previously feuding politicians. But frankly, those enmities are still there. And it's not just personal enmities. There are some real disagreements over the best way to get the hostages back. You know, there are still over 100 hostages in Gaza at the moment. Their families are devastated. You know, there was that 1-year-old baby who had birthday this week in captivity. And they're questioning, you know, is the current strikes, are they the right way to get these people back? And Netanyahu seems to want the war to continue because he knows that there's going to be a reckoning for him when this conflict calms down a little bit, because he was the one who allowed October 7th to happen. So what we're seeing now is that war cabinet basically publicly disagreeing with each other on Israeli media. And
I wonder how that will play out.
Exactly.
Over the coming months.
And Netanyahu this week has also rejected the idea of a two-state solution for Palestine as well, which the Arab states were trying to get together as a negotiating tool for getting the hostages back.
That's the obvious solution.
Well, so the question is, what does he actually want from this? Where does he see the medium term ending up being for Gaza? It's incredibly difficult, and clearly people in his war cabinet are not happy about it.
No.
And the trouble is that the world is sort of changing its stance as well, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Very supportive at the beginning, asking lots of very uncomfortable questions now.
Yeah, that's right, as particularly as the sort of civilian death toll mounts, and people, you know, there are disagreements about what are legitimate aims for Israel. I think anyone, you would be mad to think that the hostages were not the sort of first and foremost aim. I don't think that Israel can pull out or stop what it's doing until at least that question is resolved. How best to resolve it, I don't know. But yeah, how far do they go in sort of breaking Hamas is you know, an important question. It's very much up in the air.
Let's have a look at the very weird and wonderful world of online media, Fraser, because I mean, of all the stuff that's going on with Yemeni rebels and the Houthis and all the rest of it, there's one young man who's saying awful things about the UK, threatening the UK and the United States, but he's sort of been an internet sensation because he's quite good looking.
Yes, I mean, this is one of the many, part of the sort of post-October 7th derangement that we're experiencing in the West, where people now have a sort of Houthi rebel pin-up. He's been compared to the actor Timothée Chalamet, and people have dubbed him Tim Houthi Chalamet. And there are viral videos of him, you know, jumping onto ships in the Red Sea. People are swooning over him. I mean, you know, on the one hand,
he's saying he's longing for martyrdom.
That's right, because he's part of this, you know, vicious Islamist Houthi cult, and you know, this is one of the strange things that has happened in the West, is that we're sort of now elevating anyone who happens to be an enemy of Israel, no matter how vicious or terrible they are. You know, the Houthis are their literal slogan has anti-Semitism embedded in it. It's the slogan is "Death to the US, death to Israel, a curse on the Jews, and victory to Islam." So if you have any doubt where they stand on these issues, they're often being confused for Yemen itself, which I think is outrageous. You'll see on now the pro-Palestine chants, people have started singing, you know, Yemen, Yemen, do us proud, turn another ship around. But they don't represent Yemen. They are, you know, a rebel group. They've overthrown the government. They're repressing Yemeni people. So, yeah, it's almost as if someone is against Israel, if someone is against the West, suddenly we become, or certain type of Westerner becomes infatuated with them. It's utterly bizarre.
I think it's a real story of our TikTok age, isn't it?
Yes.
You saw that video. He's very famous on TikTok in particular. So what we have is like a Gen Z, you know, who are so loving these short clips and really visually appealing things, and not really thinking much about the politics behind the thing.
They're probably not listening for a minute to what he's saying. They're just looking at his face and giving him pop star sort of fan.
Exactly. Yeah. It's literally pop stardom, like fanboying. One hopes that when this generation gets slightly older, you know, they read behind the headlines and all that sort of stuff. But the worry is that TikTok melts your brain, basically.
Slightly reminiscent of the Bin Laden trend on TikTok.
Yeah.
I don't know if people remember that. A few months ago, people discovered Osama bin Laden's letter to America, and suddenly it became a viral sensation on TikTok. And, you know, obviously it's mad. To give some context, there are parts of his letter to America that he wrote after 9/11 that do sound a little bit like... there are bits of it where he's complaining about the climate crisis, he's complaining about consumerism. He does, in
There's a Venn diagram of
in between the, you know, if you put the Islamist terrorism and the anti-Semitism to one side, there are times when he sounds like a woke Westerner. But yeah, people were saying it's blown my mind, this progressive Osama bin Laden.
Lord, I know people don't think enough. Meanwhile, Cindy, let's end on, because anyone who's been to Rome knows that you can't go anywhere without seeing a hot priest calendar on sale. But there's a problem with it.
There was a hot priest calendar.
Yeah, I have to say, Stephen, I didn't know either, and I have been to Rome, so maybe...
They're on all the newsstands.
Yeah, and what's happened, basically, the photographer behind the hot priest calendar has actually admitted that most of them are not actual priests.
What?
Now... We had a look at the pictures.
They're models?
Yeah, they're models, or sometimes they're just ordinary men who are teachers or whatever. But it's because the pictures look candid. You know, they look like, you know, you're just capturing a priest on the streets. It's not like a photo shoot. You expect them to be genuine priests. Anyway, so there we go. We were just talking about how it's false advertising and people need to get their money back.
Yeah, it's outrageous. Surely part of the attraction of these priests is that they're unavailable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people might remember the hot priest character in Fleabag that seemed to capture the nation's attention a couple of years ago. So, you know, they have to be real priests if you're going to sell them as priests, I think.
Yeah. Well, should be, yes.
There must be hot priests out there, young, you know.
Oh, there are. No, you see, I've noticed the real thing. When you go to Rome, there are, you know, great lines of them, aren't there, going into the And they do look, I mean, there's something about the priest outfit as an outfit, but you know what I mean, that is very sexy.
Oh, Anne.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Go to Rome, have a look.
That's why you kept going back.
Absolutely, I love Rome.
Booking the Ryanair flight right now.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Who'd have thunk it?
Brings out the last Catholic in me.
There you go. Well, as long as they're real, you need to check their credentials.
Well, I never thought to, but I will.
No, I think you should. Right, lovely. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Let's get the check on the weather.